28 Days Later is regarded as a horror classic. It redefined the genre and went on to influence what the zombie genre would become, despite not having any zombies. Last year, the original team behind 28 Days Later reunited to make 28 Years Later, and redefine the genre once again, in my opinion. And the sequel to 28 Years Later came out this year, The Bone Temple, directed by Nia DaCosta. Unfortunately, both of those films, compared to the original, are not making as much of a killing. And also, the fan response has not been as universally beloved compared to how people talk about 28 Days Later. There's a lot more, oh yeah, but, or I don't know about this in regards to 28 Years and The Bone Temple, whereas people are pretty solidly in favor of 28 Days Later. So why is this? Well, I have 6 reasons as to why. Hi, this is Hannah from after I finished making the video. There are spoilers here, so go watch 28 Years Later. I think it's on Netflix. And then go watch The Bone Temple, which is in theaters and kicks ass. And if you don't see it, I'm telling your mom. That's enough. 1. Time. 28 Days Later has had time to exist in the public consciousness and came out at a time where this film defined the zombie genre for people in Gen X, Millennial, and Gen Z generations. It became the template for what a zombie film is in our minds. So the more time that has passed since the original, the more it builds in terms of epicness in our minds. Whereas when something else comes out that maybe challenges that idea, we don't swallow it down so easily. Part 2. Part versus whole. 28 Days Later stands alone as a complete story, whereas 28 Years Later and The Bone Temple need each other to fully make sense. While I don't think you need to see 28 Days Later to enjoy The Bone Temple, I will admit I was confused by the beginning and the end of 28 Years Later, which was a wonderful movie about grief with 2 very confusing scenes wedged at the beginning and the end of the movie. But The Bone Temple makes all of those scenes make sense and turns 28 Years Later and The Bone Temple into a complete thought. Number 3, the portrayal of the infected. The infected in 28 Days Later are pretty straightforward. That's why so many people mistake it as a zombie movie. But in 28 Years Later, we see the infected have developed into packs, pecking order, survival instincts, things we aren't used to zombies doing. Then in The Bone Temple, it goes on to ask, are the infected evil? Are they victims? And can these victims be saved if we give them our time and our effort? We see this theme develop throughout Ian and Samson's relationship in The Bone Temple, and we see Samson and the infected contrasted with an arguably much worse evil, which brings us to part 3. Part 4. The human villains. Both 28 Days Later and 28 Years Later contrast the existential horror of an infection with a very intimate human horror of what people are capable of when society collapses. In 28 Days Later, the soldiers were luring women to their camp, and in 28 Years Later, / The Bone Temple, the Jimmies roam the countryside torturing and killing anyone they come across. The Jimmies are children who grew up traumatized in this wasteland. They only know destruction and cling on to the vestiges of whatever twisted idea of childhood Jimmy Crystal still had. The Jimmies are childhood corruption incarnate, and shows what happens when you cannot come to terms with the horrible things that the world has thrown at you. You become horrible too. This is why Jimmy is the primary villain rather than the infected, or Samson the alpha infected, because when Jimmy meets Ian and is presented with new information, he chooses to use it for power and control, while Samson uses this information to rediscover his humanity. Reason number 5, the central conflict. 28 Days Later takes place just after the outbreak, so the objectives are relatively simple. Run, hide, fight, escape. It is a relatively simple problem that is wrapped up by the end. This makes for a very satisfying story. And I'm not saying 28 Days Later is a dumb movie. Far from it. It has a lot of interesting themes about how does humanity survive and what do we lose in the process, and questions how and if institutions like the military can even protect us in these disasters, or if they just add more fuel to the fire. But the film presents us with a simple question. Can these survivors find safety? And by the end, we have an answer. Yes. And if 28 Days Later is about escape, then 28 Years Later and The Bone Temple are about rebuilding. And as we all know, rebuilding takes more time, nuance, and vulnerability, and a lot of people do not have the patience to watch something be built. We tend to only watch when something falls. Instead of run, hide, fight, escape, which we still have some of in the Jimmy conflict, 28 Years Later and The Bone Temple focus on connecting, understanding, adapting, evolving, fixing, which are a lot harder to do. Reason number 6. Archetypes. The 28 Days Later films have always had interesting inversion on archetypes, but in 28 Years Later in The Bone Temple, we see these archetypes at their most extreme. In the first film, Spike's father fits the grizzled survivor archetype, the typical protagonist in these situations, and Spike realizes that this is a man who cheats on his wife, who lies to his community, and is hanging on by a thread, building himself up to be much more of a badass than he is, but in reality, this man can't and won't help his sick wife. He's given up on hope and just tries to get through every day. Then, this is contrasted with the archetypes that are often dismissed as weak in an apocalyptic scenario. A sick mother. A young boy who refuses to abandon his sick mother, even though most people imagining themselves in a zombie apocalypse would say, "Cut your losses, survival first, survival of the fittest," and this boy looks at him and says no. And a doctor who still cares about people's psychology and the meaning of humanity, not just survival. He isn't willing to just move on. He wants to honor the people who have been lost in this tragedy. These characters are arguing that compassion, love, memory are not weakness. They are fundamental components of what holds a society together. And these characters accomplish a lot more in the screen time than any of the survivalist archetypes. They are the ones who discover that the baby of an infected woman is not infected. Dr. Kelson is the one who discovers that there may be a way to bring the infected back. And Spike and Dr. Kelson are the ones who figure out a way to stop the Jimmies from their terrorizing rampage of horror.
It was horror!
These people still accomplish all of that not because they are the toughest and the roughest and the most cutthroat. It is because they still have access to their empathy, their humanity, their love. They still see beauty in the world despite everything that has happened around them. They still dance. They still mourn. They still try despite all of the losses that they have endured. Not despite of it, actually, but because of it. They honor those who have passed by creating something new. And creating anything from a relationship to a piece of an art is, to some degree, an exercise in vulnerability and potential humiliation. It's easier to dismiss, to make fun, rather than attempt to understand and engage and create. But this movie, 28 Years Later and The Bone Temple, hit me a lot harder than 28 Days Later did. Even though I would argue 28 Days Later is a much tighter film, 28 Years Later and The Bone Temple made me feel what I'm always looking for when I watch films, is a reason to hope. And this film gave me so many by reminding me that you can't just remember that everyone dies.
Momento, Amoris. Remember, you must love.
So, if you can, I would really recommend checking out 28 Years Later. Even if you're not the biggest fan of this genre, it has so much more to say than just blood and guts. And then, when you're done with that, go see The Bone Temple. People, I want another one of these beautiful musings on humanity. And if you didn't like these movies, I don't like you. I didn't mean that. I am a serious horror scholar influencer. That's an oxymoron. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. I hated making it. Making things is hard and humiliating. But The Bone Temple taught me that that's good, actually. And you should lip sync to Iron Maiden. God, this was rough. Guys, making things is so hard. I know I'm almost 30, so it was about time I became one of those cringy internet influencers. But I genuinely do love talking about horror movies, and hopefully in the future I'll get better at it. But thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more whatever the joke I'm gonna do. Look out. I'm coming for you. Also, I don't think I made one joke about how big the alpha's dong is in both movies. And I think I should be applauded for my maturity about that. Because it is very big.